Okay, let's talk about the financial sector. The term itself can sound a bit intimidating, right? A whole world of confusing jargon and, invisible forces. But here's the thing. It's the system that powers pretty much our entire daily lives. So today, we're going to grab the key and unlock how this whole thing really works.
You've probably heard this a million times, that the financial sector is the engine of the economy. And, it's a powerful idea. The thought that this one system is what makes our whole world run.
But let's be real. What does that even mean? What's the fuel for this engine? How does it actually work? And maybe the biggest question of all, who's in the driver's seat? Who's got the keys?
Well, if we want to get to the bottom of it, there's really only one thing to do. We have to follow the money. We're going to start at square one and trace it all the way up to the people pulling the levers on a global scale.
And that means we have to start with the most basic question of all. One that sounds simple but is actually surprisingly deep. What is money, really?
So, get this. At its core, money isn't really about the paper bills or the metal coins. It's about a social agreement. It's just anything that a bunch of us agree has value. I mean, historically, people used salt, grain, even shark's teeth. As long as we all buy into the idea, it works.
Okay, so what does this shared idea of money actually do for us? Well, it has four main jobs. First, it's a means of exchange, which is a fancy way of saying we don't have to trade, chickens for haircuts anymore. Phew. Second, it's a measure of value, a common yardstick to know what stuff is worth. Third, it allows for deferred payment. This one's huge. It's the concept that makes all credit and loans possible. And last, it's a store of wealth, so we can save up the value of our work for later.
All right, so we've got a handle on what money is. Now for the really wild part. Where does it actually come from? And trust me, the answer is probably not what you're expecting.
Okay, check this out. This is one of the biggest mind benders in economics. Most money is not printed by the government. It's actually created basically out of thin air, every single time a regular commercial bank gives out a loan. So when you get a mortgage, the bank isn't just handing over cash from its vault. No, it just types some numbers into your account, creating a brand new deposit. And that deposit, that is new money right there, added to the system.
This really shows the fundamental balancing act that banks have to deal with every single day. Think of it like this pyramid. At the very top, you've got cash. It's totally safe, totally liquid, but it makes them zero profit. Then, way down at the bottom, you have loans. They're the riskiest thing a bank can hold, but that's where they make all their money. So every bank is constantly walking this tightrope between safety and profit.
So if regular banks are just creating money all the time, you might be wondering, who's making sure this whole thing doesn't just fly off the rails? Well, that's where the central bank comes in, and their biggest, most powerful tool, it's the interest rate.
Okay, let's make this real. Imagine you take out a loan, and the bank says, the interest rate is 8%. That's the number they put on the paper, right? It's the price you pay for borrowing. But that's not the whole story, not even close.
See, that 8% is what we call the nominal rate. But we live in a world with inflation, which means the value of money is always shrinking a little. So if inflation is running at, say, 5%, then the bank's actual return, what they're really making in purchasing power, is just 3%. That's the real interest rate. And getting this difference is absolutely crucial to understanding how the economy actually works.
And this is the world central banks live in. They are obsessed with this stuff. They use this whole concept of interest rates to control the total amount of money in the economy. It's a process we call monetary policy.
The easiest way to think about this is like any other market. The interest rate is just the price of money. So on this graph, you've got the demand curve. That's how much money we all want to borrow. And then you have that vertical line. That's the supply of money, and the central bank is in charge of it. Where those two lines cross, boom, that's our interest rate.
So, let's say the central bank wants to give the economy a little push. What do? They increase the money supply. They shift that whole vertical line to the right. And look what happens. The new meeting point is lower. Suddenly, there's more money to go around, so it gets cheaper to borrow. The interest rate drops. And that gets businesses investing and people spending. But how do they actually do that? How do they shift that line? Well, central banks have a few tools in their toolbox. The big one is something called open market operations. Basically, they buy government bonds to inject cash right into the banking system. They can also mess with the reserve requirement. That's how much cash banks have to keep on hand. Or they can just directly change the interest rate they charge to other banks. There's a few things they can do.
But what if that whole toolkit just stops working? This chart here shows something really interesting and kind of scary, called a liquidity trap.
It's what happens when interest rates are already basically zero. The demand curve for money goes almost flat. And at that point, the central bank can pump in all the money at once, and nothing happens. The interest rate can't go any lower. Their main tool is useless.
Okay, I know we've been talking about some pretty big, abstract ideas here. But the reason this all matters is that this entire system, from how money gets made to what the central bank does, has very real consequences for you and me.
Think about it. One decision made by a handful of people at the central bank creates this huge ripple effect. It's what determines the interest rate on your mortgage or car loan. It changes how much you earn on your savings. It even influences whether businesses in your town are hiring or laying people off. It's the main control panel for the speed of the entire economy.
And those ripples, they don't just stop at a country's border. They go global through exchange rates. And here, every country has to make a big choice between two philosophies. You can have a fixed rate, which is great for stability and trade, but it puts a ton of pressure on the government to keep it there. Or you can have a floating rate, which is a more honest reflection of the economy, but it can be really unpredictable. It's this constant trade-off. Do you want predictable stability, or do you want flexible truth?
So when you step back and look at the whole thing, this entire incredibly complex financial system, you realize it's all a human invention. From the very idea of money to how banks create credit to how interest rates are set, we built this machine. It's a machine designed for stability, designed for growth, but it runs on one fuel above all else: confidence. And that leaves us with one last, really important question. What happens when that machine gets pushed to its absolute limit?